Welcome. Today, we're diving into some pretty powerful, timeless stories. They all revolve around one central idea, that we can actually fundamentally change who we are. We're going to look at how shifting our perspective, the way we deal with people, and our deepest principles can spark a real inner revolution.
So let's just jump right in with a big question. We have a tendency, right, to blame outside forces when things go wrong. Bad luck, other people. But what if the real source of a good or bad day is a lot closer to home? Our first story really digs into this.
All right, our first parable is called The King and the Omen, and it's a fantastic lesson in how fast we jump to conclusions and assign blame, and, well, how completely wrong we can be.
Okay, so picture this. There's a king who's super into omens. He's heading out for a hunt, and on the way, he sees a man with one eye. Immediately, he's convinced it's a terrible sign. He's furious, thinking his whole day is shot, so he orders his men to tie the poor guy to a tree, planning to deal with him when he gets back. But here's the twist. The king's day wasn't ruined at all. In fact, it was the exact opposite. He had the best, most successful hunt of his entire life. Meanwhile, the man he blamed for being a bad omen spent the whole day tied to a tree, probably thinking he was going to be executed. And this is where the lesson really hits home. The king comes back, all triumphant, and goes to the man. But the man confronts him with this incredible question. It just flips the entire script. It forces the king and, of course, us, to think, where does bad luck actually come from? Is it some external sign, or is it our own judgment and our own actions?
You know, that idea of perspective is the perfect lead-in to our next section, the art of engagement. Because once your character starts to transform, it changes how you interact with the world. And a big part of that is figuring out who's even worth your time to argue with.
The source tells us a great little story about a horse and a donkey. They're arguing for hours about the color of the sky. They finally take their case to the lion for judgment, and the lion punishes the horse. Now, why would he do that? It's not because the horse was wrong about the sky. It's because he wasted his time and energy arguing with a donkey. The lesson is so sharp. Sometimes, the biggest loss is just choosing to fight a battle that's impossible to win.
So, if arguing is pointless in some situations, what do you do when someone is genuinely off track or mistaken? Well, the source is clear that getting angry and yelling is not the answer. There's a much smarter, much more effective way.
And this next story just illustrates it perfectly. A young man comes up to the Prophet Muhammad and, pretty brazenly, asks for permission to commit adultery. Now, you'd expect outrage, right? A lecture? But instead, he's just invited to sit down. The Prophet doesn't tell him he's wrong. He gets him to think.
By asking these simple, personal questions, the whole issue gets reframed. He connected this abstract sin to the man's real life, to the women in his own family that he loved and respected. It completely bypassed argument and went straight to empathy. And in that moment, without being told what to think, the young man's entire perspective shifted on its own.
And all this leads us to our most powerful story of all. And this one isn't a parable. It's a real-world example of a complete and total inner revolution, from someone people feared into a symbol of incredible compassion.
So first, we meet Caliph Umar before his transformation. This was a man known for being incredibly severe, an enforcer who was genuinely feared. In his early days, he was one of the harshest opponents of the new faith sweeping through his community. But then, after his conversion, something profound happened. A complete 180. As the leader of a massive empire, he didn't lock himself away in a palace. No, he would walk the streets at night, in disguise, just to see for himself how his people were really doing. He became a true servant leader, literally carrying their burdens on his own back.
And on one of these nights, he heard the sound of children crying. He found their mother and asked what was wrong. And her answer, it's just devastating. She told him she was boiling a pot of stones just to make her starving children think food was coming, hoping they'd eventually give up and fall asleep. That reality must have just cut him to the core. And what he did next is everything. The ruler of millions of square miles didn't send a servant, he didn't issue a decree, he ran to the state treasury himself, hauled a sack of flour on his own back, and came back to cook for that family with his own 2 hands, blowing on the fire until the smoke singed his beard. After the children had eaten and were finally laughing and playing, he told the woman who he was. But listen to this.
His main concern wasn't about his authority or his image. It was about accountability. He pleaded with her to forgive him for his neglect, not just then, but on the day of judgment. That shows a transformation so total that his ego is just gone, replaced by pure duty and humility.
So, you have to wonder, what on earth drives that kind of deep, profound change? How does that even happen? Well, for the answer, the source points us to the Sufi saint Dada Ganj Bakhsh, who really lays out a clear path.
And it's a whole process, not just one thing. It starts with seeking knowledge, yeah, but it goes deeper. You have to cultivate a real, genuine love for higher principles, so that devotion feels like a joy, not a chore. It's about living with integrity, understanding that being truly rich has nothing to do with money, and then, finally, putting all of that into action by serving others.
The source basically argues that when a person gets their inner self completely aligned with these principles, when their actions, their thoughts, and their heart are all in sync, then extraordinary things can happen. And they're not seen as magic tricks. They're seen as the natural outcome of living in harmony with a deeper truth.
And this is wrapped up beautifully in one last little story. A traveler comes across a hermit in the wilderness and is just stunned to see a wolf peacefully guarding the hermit's sheep. When he asks how this is even possible, the hermit just says, "When the shepherd made peace with God, God made peace between the wolf and the sheep."
And that leaves us with a really powerful thought to sit with. These stories are suggesting that true, deep integrity has the power to reorder the world around us, to literally reconcile a predator and its prey. So if that's true, what conflicts in our own lives, in our communities, in our world could be healed if we first focused on that inner transformation?